really outweighing the reward at that point. You played a good football game. Don't give it away in one moment. Let your team take care of business on the defensive end, and you know that you can score against Alabama because you had scored. You had been up big. You actually would have been up even bigger had you not missed that field goal attempt. You could have been leading by more than 2 touchdowns at one point in the game. Yes, your defense gave up points to end that game and get that game to be tied and put you in that position to begin with. But I just think that, and I've said it before, anytime you can play more football and give your players, your star players, more of a chance to rise up and take care of business, you have to take that option. Even in a situation where it's win or go home, like Georgia was in, I get that, but at the same time, you're going to take all of the minutes of football that you played and all of the effort from the over 40 players who had been in and out of that game at that point and put it on one guy to make a play, a fake punt play. To me, Justin, that just doesn't seem to make sense. It just doesn't seem that the probabilities and the win percentage was going in their favor to pull off a miracle play like that. I just don't see risking the entire game, everything you put in up to that point on that one moment. That didn't make sense to me.
If it's 4th and 1, 4th and 2, 4th and 3, okay, maybe you see that there's a good chance that they could throw a surprise in there at that point and catch Alabama off guard. But 4th and 11, that's asking a lot at that point for the fake. So I agree. They had Alabama on the ropes that whole game. You make Jalen Hurts drive down the field on you at that point. It just felt like a panic move that just didn't need to be made at that point. So we know the 4 teams that'll play for the college football national title. You've got Oklahoma versus Alabama. You've got Clemson versus Notre Dame. So did the committee get these 4 teams right, Eric, or do you feel like Ohio State made a case to jump in?
Oh, gosh.
Maybe I'm asking the wrong person that question.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully we're doing this remote this week, because if you were sitting across the podcast studio, I'd throw something at you. Ohio State does not deserve to be in this. I mean, I just think that finally, for the first time in a few years, I'm happy with where the committee landed on things. Oklahoma definitely deserved to be in over Ohio State. Oklahoma's one loss came against a division rival, and it was earlier this year. Meanwhile, Ohio State's one loss came when they got blown out by Purdue, who's not exactly, I mean, I know it's a Big Ten rival, but it's not exactly a huge game in the sense that Purdue is this annual contender in college football. So if you look at just the losses, Ohio State had a worse loss. And I think Oklahoma just proved most of the year that they were a better team. Now, look, I know they play in a conference that people will, say is suspect as far as especially the defenses, and there's a lot of free points given away in that conference and all of these things. I get that. You'll even see that come up in the Heisman conversation because these two teams have, individuals in the Heisman conversation. So I get all of that, but I think, it's obvious Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame being undefeated, that they get in, and then Oklahoma, to me, was the better of the one-loss teams. What I was wondering to you, Justin, is there any chance, and I think I know the answer, but is there any case to be made for the University of Central Florida at 12-0?
Not after they lost their quarterback. I think you could have made that case if he hadn't gotten hurt, but with him being out, I think at that point you would be risking a blowout in one of your 3 marquee games that you have left. As much as I like that story, if he had stayed healthy, yeah, I think you could maybe have entertained that thought. But once he went down, I don't think you could go there. And look, I don't agree either. I don't think Ohio State should have made it in. I think it's a non-story. I think you'd have a better chance of talking about the fact that Notre Dame gets in. Yeah, they haven't had a loss, but they also didn't have to play in a conference title game where the other 3 did. Look, Notre Dame kind of marches to their own beat. They have their NBC deal. They're not locked in with anybody. They make a truckload of money. It just doesn't feel right when you've got Alabama and you've got Clemson and Oklahoma and even Ohio State, and you could throw Texas in the mix. You've got these teams that are all, Georgia's in there as well, where they all go out and have to play another very tough opponent at the end of the year and sort of shake things up. And Notre Dame, once they beat USC, was like, okay, we can just sit back and kick our feet up now because we're locked in. Doesn't matter what happens around us. I don't typically agree with that. That's the one thing I feel like needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I got to ask you this, because it's conjecture at this point, but had Georgia gone on to beat Alabama, what do you think would have happened then? I mean, because which team at that point then gets screwed out of the top 4? Does Alabama drop from 1 to 5 in that scenario? Or does Alabama drop from 1 to 4, and then you have to decide, does Notre Dame or Oklahoma get held out? Because obviously Georgia would be then in the top 4.
I think Oklahoma would have been out. I can't see that how they would have basically on one game, Alabama's only going to have one loss and you're going to boot them out because they lost to a team like Georgia, who you think is number 4 or in the top 4 in the country. So, yeah, I think it would have been Oklahoma on the outside looking in. I think Clemson and Notre Dame at that point would have been locked in. I think you would have had to put Georgia in. And based on what Alabama's done for the entire season, I don't see how you could have just had them get jumped at that point by Oklahoma. I think that would have been very interesting to see. It definitely would have thrown a wrench into this, but I like the 4 teams that are in there, especially with Oklahoma getting in, because Kyler Murray is extremely fun to watch. And let's talk a little bit about the Heisman Trophy. It's upcoming this weekend on Saturday night. So you've got Tua Tagovailoa, you've got Kyler Murray, you've got Dwayne Haskins as the 3 finalists for this. So who should win the Heisman Trophy on Saturday night?
This is probably the best question on the show so far, because I don't think the answer is as obvious as I thought it was at one point. I thought Tua was a shoo-in for Heisman this year until what happened this past weekend. Now, look, Kyler Murray is fantastic to watch. I believe he had something like 40 touchdown passes. So to me, I think he's a major contender. And I think Dwayne Haskins is hey, it's nice to be invited, because the other two are far and away better at quarterback than Dwayne Haskins. So Haskins is not going to win. But to me, because Jalen Hurts came in and led Alabama back to a win in that game, it kind of goes to show that maybe Alabama is so strong as a football team that it wasn't necessarily Tua that made all of the difference. And I know Jalen Hurts is a good athlete as well, but to me, I think then that tips the scale to Kyler Murray, a guy who, like I said, 40 touchdowns, had a phenomenal season. We know that Oklahoma is in the hunt for a national championship. We know that Oklahoma has produced a lot of Heisman winning quarterbacks, Jason White, Sam Bradford, Baker Mayfield. You've got players there that have done that. The only thing that the committee might be thinking is that Alabama's still the number 1 team. Tua had a great year. He led them, most of the way, and he would be Alabama's first ever Heisman winning quarterback. If all of those emotional factors lead into it, I think maybe it goes to Tua. But I'll say it again. The fact that Alabama came back and won that game after Tua went out and was replaced by another quarterback just shows you that I think a major portion of their success is the team and not just one player. And that's where I think Kyler Murray may have the edge.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you. I think 3 weeks ago, even 2 weeks ago, it felt like it was a slam dunk for Tua. It felt like Jalen Hurts actually hurt Tua's chances of winning the Heisman by bringing them back in a game that, let's face it, Tua didn't play all that great in. So Kyler Murray, he's just got all the stats. Insanely high completion percentage. And look, a lot of that's due to the offense and some of the throws that they make. Over 4,000 passing yards, 40 passing TDs, 11 rushing TDs, almost 900 rushing yards. And then I even think you have to look at Haskins. 4,580 passing yards, 47 passing TDs, 4 more rushing TDs for him. So both he and Kyler Murray accounted for 51 TDs for their teams this year. I actually think maybe that both of them have actually passed Tua. And I think that some of the dominance that Alabama had, where Tua basically wasn't playing sometimes in the late third or fourth quarter early in the year to be able to rack up some of these stats is going to hurt him when it comes back to Saturday, because there's always recency bias. And Kyler Murray has now been on the stage for quite a few weeks on national TV and primetime spots. Basically same with Dwayne Haskins when he's coming off the rivalry game versus Michigan and then the Big Ten title game. So I think those things are going to hurt Tua. And I think what we thought was going to be a runaway, I don't think it's going to work out that way on Saturday night, but we'll have more reaction to that next week. Before we close out college football portion of Talk Worthy, let's talk about the news that broke this week that seemed to be a bit of a surprise. Urban Meyer announced that he will be retiring from his head coaching position following the Rose Bowl. If you've watched much of Ohio State this year, there's times where Urban Meyer looks like he's not even going to be able to make it through a game. He looks so basically exhausted, or that there's something else going on. But there's a ton of speculation about potential other jobs, even the NFL. There's talk of, would he go to a team like the Packers, something like that. So, Eric, do you feel that Urban Meyer is stepping down from his head coaching spot at Ohio State because he actually is retiring? Is this something that's health-related? Or is he potentially looking for a different job here in the future?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, he's a guy who had success at Utah, he's a guy who had success at Florida. He then, had health issues, retired for a while, and then came back, decided he wanted to coach at Ohio State. He's had some obvious success at Ohio State. He's now, this year, been under a lot of stress with the scandal and with not getting to the big stage again. I'm not a doctor. It's not for me to say. I think it's just worn him out. I think this coaching thing, the recruiting, his health, the scandals, all that goes along with college football, it would not surprise me, if he's being honest, that he needs to retire, and this has just worn him out. So I know he said it's all about family after the Florida thing, and then he ended up coming back, but I might actually take Urban Meyer at his word this time, and I know it's hard to take him at his word sometimes, but I think he might be done. I really do. I think it might have just gotten to a point where the landscape in college football, the difficulty and the grind of trying to win a national championship at a major school like Ohio State, all the recruiting, all of the things that go along with that, major headaches when you've got scandals going on with your other coaches. And it might be time for him to just say, you know what, I'm done.
When I first heard this story, it's sad, sort of the state of college sports. One of the first things I thought about was, is there something going to be coming down on Ohio State here within the next 1 to 2 years where Urban wants to get out now and sort of distance himself from that? That's sort of the sad state of college sports when you see really good coaches or legendary figures in programs that suddenly step aside. You're sort of always waiting for, what's coming? So with Urban Meyer, with his track record, both with going to different programs and then some of the health issues, you kind of seem like you want to take him at his word, but I will not be surprised if in 1 to 2 years on this podcast, we're talking about something happening at Ohio State University. That's just the sad part of the sort of the state of college football and college sports in general. So, Eric, let's now take it to another football-related story and something back in our college days we used to follow closely, being the WWE. Many, many years ago, they had the one-year failed experiment being the XFL. Well, Vince McMahon is reviving the XFL for a 2020 comeback. On Wednesday, they announced the 8 cities that are going to have a team when play kicks off. It's going to be the New York, New Jersey area, Dallas, Houston, LA, St. Louis, Seattle, Tampa Bay, and Washington, D.C. It also seems like Vince McMahon has sort of changed his philosophy in the fact that he's bringing in a lot of football minds. You have Oliver Luck as the commissioner. You have Doug Whaley involved, Jim Caldwell, also John Fox. So you have a lot of football minds that he is now put in charge of running this league and trying to get them off on the right foot. It looks like their next step will be getting a TV partner. So, Eric, it seems like Vince McMahon has learned from some of the mistakes that happened during the first trial run of the XFL. He seems like he's trying to slow this thing down, do it right, bring in the right people to consult with this and make good decisions. So do you think the XFL can actually be a success this time?
I'm fascinated. I really am. I don't think it was set up right the first time. I think you pointed out all of the things really that were a big failure. But this time, it seems like they're more heavily invested in the process of becoming a viable sports league. They're also not trying to compete with the NFL in the sense that in 2020, when they kick off, their season doesn't begin until after the Super Bowl. So you're not going to have any competition with directly the NFL games. Now, I know we talk about how the NFL is trying to dominate the kind of news cycle all season long because you've got obviously the draft in the spring and then you've got OTAs and mini camps and You have all of these things throughout the season that the NFL has really done well to package and get some media coverage for. The XFL is going to take some of that for sure in the spring, but I think it's going to come down to who they have playing for their teams and what they really mean by reimagining the game of football. The XFL's position this time is that they love the game of football, but they would like to remove a lot of the things